Hey guys, welcome back to Teen Muscle Radio and episode number 25. So today we are very, very lucky to be joined by, as you can see, Jeff Nippard. And there's been a lot of excitement for this episode. I posted a little preview and asking for any sort of questions in a group that I run, and there was a lot of excitement. Like, a lot of people love you, Jeff. A lot of people follow you. So really, really is a pleasure to have you on. And obviously thanks to the listeners for coming back for another episode. But how are you, Jeff? Are you good?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate all the love.
No worries. You deserve it.
We'll make sure it's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you've been putting in the grind recently, and obviously your growth recently on social media has been outstanding. So really impressive, and you know, like I said, a pleasure to have you on. So today we are going to be discussing primarily muscle gain. Now, obviously we've had previous guests on the podcast talk about muscle gain, but I think what's really special about Jeff, and probably if you followed him you will know this, is that Jeff's really clued up. He's really smart when it comes to the science, and he's also got what I like in the fact that he's also extremely jacked as well. He's got the physique to boot. Like, he really has, you know, developed his physique over the years. He's also a WNBF Pro, so I think it really does validate this episode and having Jeff on, and I'm sure a lot of people were looking forward to it. So Jeff, I'd really like to start with giving the listeners a little bit of context and background as to your experiences through muscle gain phases. So if you could just take us back to sort of maybe the initial phases of you first delving into muscle gain, what it looked like, and then obviously how that evolved over time.
Sure. So do you want me to go back through my whole training history? I can do it super quick because some people might be familiar with it.
Yeah,
so I initially was a martial artist, so I was trained in Taekwondo as a black belt, got involved in basketball after that.
Okay.
And most of my training was set towards improving my vertical leap. So I did a lot of plyometric training and athletic style training set towards my basketball related goals, namely being able to dunk at 5'5", which I was never quite able to do, but I could get my full palm over the rim. So I managed to work up to about a 40-inch running vertical at the time. From there, I sort of transitioned into resistance training, again, mostly from an athletic perspective, so a lot of athletic type movements. Later realized that basketball wasn't necessarily in line with my genetic endowments. I was more so built as a bodybuilder than a basketball player.
Okay.
So I decided to restructure my training in a way that was more in line with my bodybuilding goals. So I started doing a bro split where I'd hit a given body part or a couple body parts every day. And I ran with that for a few years. That built me a good chunk of size in my newbie period. And then I did my first competition when I was 19. So after about 4 years of actual training.
Sure.
And then from there, So I won the provincial title in Newfoundland, Canada as a junior in my weight class. Then I went on to win it again. And then I went on to win the Canadian title. So I won the title of Mr. Junior Natural Canada. So in the drug-tested stream in Canada, I won the national title for bodybuilding in 2012.
Okay.
And then from there, I earned my pro card in California in the WNBF, as you said, in 2014, and I've done one pro show since then. It was sometime between 2010 and 2012 that I started to mesh together my academic experience with my training experience. So I sought out the help of Lane Norton and familiarized myself with guys like Alberto Nunez, Alan Aragon, and these sorts of names, and started to educate myself on a way to train and diet that was more science-based. And I felt like that was in some degree responsible for taking my physique, I guess, to the next level, or at least doing it in a way that was more congruent with my education and my belief system as a scientist, and also more in line with a healthier lifestyle, or at least a social lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an awesome background, and I think that your your physique has, drastically changed over the years, obviously from pictures that people will see on Instagram. And I think it's highly motivating as a younger trainee to see that, obviously, as a natural, your potential is there to get much, much bigger than you were when you started. But one of the questions I had, the last question on your rookie years, was when do you really think that you built the majority of your tissue, and what was your training like, and why do you think it was so successful at that period in time?
That's a good question. I don't recall there being a period of time where I went from looking really, say, skinny to looking really muscular. Like, there wasn't like 1 year that I really blew up, even my first few years. And I think it's because I was so involved in athletics that I was at best at caloric maintenance or slight surplus. So I probably wasn't really eating enough in my initial training phases to gain as much size as I could have. I probably left some gains on the table in that period. I would say that the best gains I got were between 2010 and 2012, which, like I said, was around the time that I started training in more of a science-based way. And it was also a period of time that I took off from competing. So I dieted 2009, again the next year. Then I took a full year off season. So 2011, I was in a surplus the whole time, no mini cuts or anything.
Okay.
Then 2012, I prepped, and then I competed again mid-2012. So having that roughly year and a half to just grow made a big difference, in spite of the fact that it was, I don't know, 6 years deep into my training career.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think a lot of the time, and a lot of the people I've spoken to in the past, obviously, say that the investment in the physique is so integral, and I can totally relate to you on that front. I think that the changes that I've made in a year off season has been dramatic comparative to the gains that I saw taking a smaller off season between 6 months, 5 months in a surplus, and then competing again the next year.
Yeah,
the gains are almost coming primarily from how you retain muscle in the next diet, as opposed to putting on slabs of tissue that you would do in that 12-15 month gaining phase. So yeah, interesting, and I think that a lot of viewers again will take home from that the investment side of things is super important.
Yeah.
So when it comes to setting up training for muscle gain, Jeff, and I know that you work with clients as well on this. So I think I know the majority of our listeners are primarily intermediate trainees. So when it comes to setting up the split for an intermediate trainee, what would you favor, and also what would you need to know from this person in terms of maximizing the split or the route that you choose in terms of obviously frequency, and in terms of the training split itself?
Yeah, good question. I think it would, as you alluded to, really depend on the individual. And if we're coming at this from a bodybuilding perspective, which I think we are, rather than a powerlifting one. So if it's someone who really is say primarily focused on hypertrophy, maybe they care a little bit about strength, which is most people, then I think that you really want to look at, insofar as the split is concerned, what do you need to improve on to make yourself look as proportional and jacked as you can? So I think that specialization is really important, and specificity is really important. So if someone has a lagging body part, like a upper chest, for example, then you would want to set up your training in such a way that would prioritize that weak point. I think that really is ultimately the goal of bodybuilding, is to have a physique that's symmetrical, proportional, and well developed, and then in the later stages, conditioned or lean. So I in terms of actually setting it up, there's so many different ways that you can do it. But I think that for an intermediate, something that tends to work for most people would be a push-pull legs split. So you would train push, so chest and triceps and shoulders, pull back and biceps, traps, and legs. And then you would either take a rest day or just repeat the cycle and then take a rest day. I think that with increasing advancement, it might be more important to undulate a little bit during that week. So whereas with more, Yeah, with the rep range. So with a beginner, you might be able to get away with doing the exact same workout in both of those little microcycles. With a more advanced athlete, you might want to do, say, like a heavy session earlier in the week, and then a lighter, more pump focused session later in the week. But there's like a million ways that you can do it, and there are a ton of variations on that split or other splits that would work. You mentioned frequency. I think that the majority of the scientific research seems to indicate that training each body part 2 times a week is better than once a week. So I would recommend setting up your split in a way that would allow you to hit each body part twice a week at least. It's not perfectly clear whether frequencies higher than that are better or worse. So it's not that higher frequencies can't work. I just find that it tends to be personally a little bit less of an enjoyable way to train, but a lot of people seem to enjoy full body training or upper lower training or what have you that would allow for greater frequencies. And then that's also not to say that lower frequencies don't work or can't work. They've certainly been shown to be effective in the literature and in the field. If you look at a lot of the top natural bodybuilders, they employ 1 time per week training programs and they seem to work just fine. So it's, I think, unwise to be dogmatic about it one way or another, but recognize that all of these things can work. It's simply a function of whether you're looking for what is theoretically most optimal or what may or may not give you that little bit of edge. If you're someone who likes to analyze like me, then I think that you tend to put a little bit more weight in things that might make that little bit of difference and try to figure out what is going to do that. So
yeah, for sure. Now that makes a lot of sense, and I think when it comes to obviously the frequency side of things, I can sort of agree with you in the idea of the very, very high frequency splits getting a little bit boring when it comes to the session itself. I'll look at it on paper and I'll think, that's I'm not really focusing on certain areas, and I think the session can sometimes drag on quite long as well, and that's something that kind of puts you off. But for the majority, like especially if you're talking about like a very, very new trainee, obviously higher frequencies can really pay off in getting them just to do movements on a regular basis. I also had a question. You touched on weak body parts and specialization. When it comes to weak body parts, what do you tend to see on most physiques that are sort of regular weak points, and how would you go about targeting these in a specialization block? How would you do that?
Yeah, great question. I would say the common culprits are, especially in young guys, legs generally tend to get skipped more than they should, but I think that hamstrings especially are an issue. I think that rear delts tend to lag behind side and front delts, and upper chest tends to lag behind mid and lower. Though, just from my experience, sometimes guys will neglect their back, but let's say we're addressing a population who's pretty serious about their physique goals, so they're not just your average gym bro who like only trains the mirror muscles kind of thing. In that case, I would say focus on hamstring, rear delt, and upper chest development for most guys. And then the way to do that, one way to do it, and I think probably the simplest way as a quick fix, would be to see if you can feel the muscles working when you're doing the exercises you're already doing. So let's just take hamstrings as the first example. A lot of people with Romanian deadlifts will load it too heavily to the point that their lower back really ends up taking over, and they no longer feel any sort of stretch or contraction in their hamstrings. And it's very true that just because you're moving a certain load, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're activating the muscle that you want to activate to a large degree. So I put quite a lot of stock in mind-muscle connection with weak body parts. And I found it to be the case that a lot of people who are struggling to develop a given body part do struggle with establishing a mind-muscle connection. So I don't think that that's a coincidence. With rear delts, again, I feel like a lot of people will use their traps when doing transverse extension, and so
quite a short range of motion, right?
One thing that I've found to help a lot is, let's say you're just doing bent over or reverse flies. Think about pushing your palm, like the back of the palm of your hand, so like the back of your hand, think about pushing it out rather than thinking about flying up. So like if you're thinking about flying up, I find like people are more likely to squeeze their shoulder blades together and get their traps involved. If they're thinking about pushing out, they're more likely to use their rear delt, and like you can feel it come on big time. So you need to think about those little cues that you can use internally to help activate the muscle that you're wanting to build. Third weak point that I find is pretty common is upper chest, at least relative to mid and lower. So I would say to include some inclines, close grip presses, use bands, chains, accommodating resistance, that sort of thing has been shown to lead to increased upper pec activation. And then also just playing with your grip position to find an angle that works best for you so you can feel your upper chest working.
Okay. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I think when it comes to mind-muscle connection, that's something that I guess sometimes people lose along the journey. So they'll get into training and perhaps they'll follow things like Flex Magazine or the more bodybuilding side of things. And then they'll find people that obviously log their training, they log their sessions. They're very focused on progressive overload. And I think the whole mind-muscle connection has maybe taken a back seat just a little bit. I'm not sure if you agree, but I think it is super important that people are doing movements where they actually feel the muscle that's trying to work rather than just simply overloading with weights. Like they're progressing their lifts, but they get to a point where they're no longer feeling a bench press in their chest because they're banging it off their chest, and same with the RDL, etc. So I think you can get quite clued up in the numbers and forget to actually feel the movements themselves. So that's a really, really good thing. And obviously that leads on to as well with the form and the actual stimulus of the movement. I think again people get lost in adding weight to the bar and then forgetting that the form should be the same throughout. And I know Nunes uses the term like timeless form. There's something you should be repeating on a regular basis. So that makes a lot of sense. My next question really is surrounding, I guess, periodizing your training. So when you set up people's training for, like a however long you set a training block for, what would that generally look like? And would you, with an intermediate trainee, would you look to increase volume through adding sets to workouts, or would you let the volume add up itself by people just simply getting stronger and adding more weight to the bar? And what do you think are the benefits of either adding volume like by adding sets or by letting people slowly increase it and then obviously deloading? What's your opinions on that?
Good question. First thing I want to quickly just circle back around to is the mind muscle connection thing. I think that the case can be made from both sides actually. I think if you're doing a barbell squat and you're trying to get stronger with your squat, it would be smarter to focus on external cues. So big, broad, full body cues, like keep your chest up or back into the bar, or keep your knees out in the direction of your toes, these sorts of things, rather than thinking about like activating your quads or something like that. When it comes to more isolation, single joint type movements, I absolutely think it's really important, and it can be important for those exercises too. It just depends on what you're trying to do. If you're just trying to get stronger, focusing internally might not be the smartest way to do that. If you're trying to, say, activate your glutes in a sumo deadlift, you can absolutely do that to a greater degree by constantly, squeezing them or posteriorly tilting at the top, that kind of thing, right? So it's not necessarily that people get caught up in the numbers and forget about a mind-muscle connection, because sometimes that might be the best thing to do. It kind of depends on where people are in their training block and within the context of their whole routine and goals and so on. But I understand that we're on the same page with that one, though. Yeah. So the next thing about volume. So I have gotten, I think, increasingly less enthralled with volume being a main driver of anything, really. Okay. I think that the case can certainly be made that volume is the main driver of hypertrophy, but as far as I'm concerned, it's still relatively controversial within the community. There's at least pushback from other researchers who might be less known. Fisher and Steele, as one example, have published comprehensive reviews on hypertrophy, and their conclusions are more in line with the idea that the volume is not that important. And provided that sets are taken to momentary muscular failure, or at least within a certain threshold of intensity, so pretty close to failure, then that is perhaps more important than the number of sets that you do. Of course, Schoenfeld and others recently released their meta-analysis on training volume, and they found a pretty strong effect towards dose. They even claim dose-response relationship between training volume and hypertrophy. So they do seem to be in a strong relationship with one another. But I think that it plays into the picture along with intensity perhaps more than is given credit for. So lately, especially, I've been putting a lot more emphasis on intensity of effort, especially how hard are you pushing yourself in the sets that you do rather than the number of sets that you do. And I think that it comes down to the debate between people who are volume advocates and say that you should leave, a few reps in the tanks for the sake of increasing the total volume of the workout. Otherwise, your subsequent performance is going to be inhibited if you go to failure too early. Or maybe that's putting it in the wrong direction. Maybe you should, push yourself early when you're strong and able to, be fresh and so on, and get that intensity, give that priority. And then if you need to make up the volume later with, say, a drop set or a set with a little less intensity, then do that then.
Sure.
I'm not sure I'm perfectly comfortable putting one of those variables ahead of the other. If there's anything that I'm quite convinced drives hypertrophy, it's progressive overload, which isn't synonymous with increases in volume, right? So you can progressively overload in a ton of different ways. You could simply slow down the cadence of the movement or control it a little bit better, and that would be a form of overload, even if the sets or rep count didn't, or load or nothing increased, right? So there are lots of ways to progress in that way, not just with volume. And then, of course, the other big thing that I'm confident drives hypertrophy are genetic factors, and those are enormous. And so I just wanted to bracket the ensuing conversation within that context, because I think that a lot of people really put volume on a pedestal that I'm not convinced it deserves to be on. So to answer your question, I do still think it's a good idea. I think that all else being equal, more is better when it comes to training. So I do try to do that. I generally will tell my clients that as long as they're increasing the weight or adding a rep throughout the course of the training block, then I'm happy. I will also often build in set increases. So usually like every couple of weeks, I'll either every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, say they're running an 8-week block, I'll add in, say, 1 set per exercise to test and see if they're, still able to recover, see how I'd also track RPE with most clients. So see if their RPEs for given exercises are changing or they're getting too high. That might indicate that the volume is a little bit too high, in which case I'll reduce it. But generally, I like to push the set volume just because I'm generally of the opinion that if you can do more and you have the time to do more and you want to do more and you want to get as much results as you can, then it makes sense to do more set volume. So I generally will titrate that in sort of thing throughout the training block. But I also encourage progressive overload in the form of increasing load and adding reps when possible.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Obviously, that protrudes to one of my further questions when it comes to what were your opinions on people simply sometimes not training hard enough and focusing too much on just adding load to the bar. And what I've seen, potentially with maybe, I guess, some programming approaches, people will start at such a low intensity that they make great progress, but they've only made great progress because they've started with a very low intensity.
Exactly.
PR, but in reality, they've only just got to a potential where they should actually be working that hard in the first place. Agreed?
Exactly. Yeah. At week 8, they could have done their week 8 PR in week 1 and gotten on with it. Yeah. No, I totally see that. And it's definitely a trend I don't approve of, and I'm not convinced that it's very effective for progress. So I think that just in general, people who are more successful at anything, any sport, tend to be the ones who can push themselves. That doesn't mean you always have to go balls to the wall, but I think that a lot of people would stand to benefit from learning where that line is, flirting with that line a little bit more, pushing yourself too hard, see what happens. I think that overtraining is a concern that's blown out of proportion big time. I think a lot of people would benefit from just training harder. And I think a lot of people, as much as I respect analyzation and scientific literature and everything, I feel like a lot of people would do well to just simplify their training and train hard and see what results they can get from it. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of merit in that.
Yeah, no, agreed. I'm on the side of that. However, I must admit that I've probably been on the other side too frequently as well. So mm-hmm. I'll be like, well, as long as you're making progress, that's fine. And then I get a video from a client on a leg press with their hardest set, and it'd be, nowhere near the intensity that they need to be at. Mm-hmm. And I think I agree with you with the trend side of things, is that having spoken to a few people that are, at the top of their game, there is some trends in the way that they do simply just train very hard and on a consistent basis. And so that sort of leads very nicely into my next question, Jeff, which is, when we're training hard, obviously we will naturally accumulate fatigue, and lifts will at some point potentially stall or even regress. Now, what would be your approach when you see this happening, either with yourself or a client? I've been aware of, obviously, people having different approaches to this. Some people will say time off the gym. Some people will say deload. Obviously, potentially the literature will suggest that deloading is potentially the best way. Alongside that, exercise rotation, etc. So what would be your approach to a stalling lift or stalling lifts, and why?
Okay, so if you're at a stall, I think you have to ask yourself, you need to figure out if it's a recovery issue or something else. So
reverse engineer, basically, yeah.
Yeah, so basically, if you're stalled and you're recovering adequately from your training, or you feel like you're recovering adequately from your training, then you probably need to do more, right? Okay. And I feel like this could be the case in some cases as well. If you're stalled from your training and you feel beat up and you're sore, and you can generally tell when you're not recovering well, right? You feel like shit. You're not recovering between sessions. Then you probably need to do less. And so, in my experience, the best way to do that is through a deload. So you would reduce both the volume and the intensity, and you can knock that down. If you're running like a hybrid powerlifting bodybuilding program, knock down the % 1RM by 10%, something like that. Knock down the RPE a couple notches, and then slash off a set, and you're good for each exercise. And that will generally fix people up pretty well after a week if it's just a little bit of overreaching. If there's an injury in place, I think it's probably smarter to just don't do anything that is going to potentially aggravate that until it's recovered, and then get back into it. So that's when I would take the full training break. But I think that most bodybuilders who don't also do powerlifting don't really need a full week break, especially if they enjoy training. Like for me, to take a week off training would suck. I would hate that. It would make the rest of my life so much worse. So I don't think that it's necessary, but at the same time, it's certainly not going to hurt. It takes a whole lot longer than a week to actually lose any muscle. So there theoretically could be some benefit to taking the full week off, but I don't think it would be enough to justify the stir craziness you might see as a result.
Yeah, makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah. I think something that I've learned myself is that a lot of the time you understand how it feels to need time away, whether that's like a deload or an extra day in between sessions. You just get a gauge over time. Yeah. And obviously you're super experienced, in my opinion, as a trainee. I think that, would you agree that over time you just get better at auto-regulating when you deload, etc.?
Yeah, I think so. It really depends on what you're doing, but I feel like personally, I don't feel the need to deload all that frequently. I'm not running any powerlifting programming right now, so I find relatively easy to recover from. So I don't think you need to deload just because you're feeling sore or something like that. Just keep pushing yourself. See let's see what your limit is first, and then, then you can throw in a deload. But I don't think that they need to be set in stone as to when they happen.
Okay.
When you're powerlifting, it's a little bit different because those lifts are more taxing centrally, and they tend to accumulate fatigue more. So
yeah, no, absolutely. That actually again leads on quite nicely to a question that I had when it comes to, obviously you're a little bit ahead of where most people are when it comes to the listeners that listen to the podcast in terms of training age. So when it comes to specific movements, what would you say has been somewhat harder to progress over time? So, that certain lifts will be really easy to progress and you won't have to look at potentially other options or accessory movements over time. And this is primarily focused on bodybuilding. So like obviously compound lifts, etc. But what do you find usually with people is some of the lifts that maybe take longer to progress, and why?
For me personally, I guess like in terms of power lifts or just body parts.
Power lifts, power lifts.
Okay, for me, my deadlift sucks because I have really short arms, which is part of the reason why my bench is so good.
Sure.
You usually don't see guys with both, but my deadlift, it's just anthropometry in that case. So there's not a whole lot I can do other than, train my deadlift more. But with an injury, it's a little difficult for me to do that. And other than that, it's so individual. I don't know if I've noticed any trends with things other than those muscles that people tend to have a difficult time establishing a mind-muscle connection with. Some people aren't able to connect with their glutes, or, we've already talked about the hamstrings, rear delts, and upper chest. I feel like those are pretty common.
But that's pretty much it, yeah. I mean, I think, what about females at all? Have you noticed any trends with like pushing movements at all with females and them being slower to progress?
Yeah, it depends on if they have an athletic background or not. I find females with an athletic background generally tend to be better with upper body movements and just knowing how to push themselves generally. I find that a lot of females, especially new females, put a lot of emphasis on form to the point that it impedes their ability to train as hard as they would need to.
Yeah.
It's like their little muscles give out before the big ones even start to take a bit of a hit, like in rowing movements, for example. It's like they're so focused on being like upright and perfect with the cadence and everything. It's like, just get into it and start like pushing yourself a little bit, So yeah, just to rip on the females a little bit, that's probably the main fault that I see there. And just general awkwardness, like in pressing movements, like you said, it's just those stabilization muscles are just not used to being used. But newbies in general are like that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But I don't know, calves, a lot of people struggle with calf development.
Okay.
That's a pretty standardly stubborn muscle for both genders, I think.
Yeah. Unless you're gifted like yourself, which
exactly
is giant calves. Yeah, I think a lot of people are probably jealous of that, Jeff.
Yeah, I don't train them. I had to make up a science video on that one and make it look like I trained them. I was sore for a week after it.
Brilliant. Now the secret's out. When it comes to, and I've spoken to various people regarding this topic and had several different opinions, so I'm interested to know what you think. When it comes to taking in a physical logbook into your sessions, writing everything down, logging every set and giving yourself lots of data to work with, what do you see the importance of this? And is it something that you've done all your training career? And have you had phases of using it, not using it, etc.?
Mm-hmm. I used to do it quite religiously. I'd track all my weights for every exercise, like leg extensions, just like everything. And I did that for a while. I kind of see it like I see tracking macros at this point. It's useful as a tool to know what what direction you're headed in. But after a while, I feel like I can keep kind of a mental catalog of it and sort of intuit where I am just internally. So I don't do it personally now. I don't track anything in the gym, but I will keep a mental catalog of what I'm doing. So, for example, on the T-bar row, I'll know that I'm up to 3 plates for 8 to 10 reps, and I'll try to slowly increase that over time. Or with wide grip pull-ups, I've topped out the top end of my 15 to 20 rep range. So now I need to start loading it a little bit for 15 reps, which is exciting to me because that's progress. I don't need to write down body weight X 18, body weight X 18 to know how many reps I'm doing week to week. I can kind of keep track of it at this point. And so I also, like you kind of mentioned, have been really focusing on the business side of things. So I've been filming a lot of my workouts, or I'll document them on social media. I've been Snapchatting a lot of my workouts, and that takes time, like a lot of time. Like sometimes it'll add an extra hour to the workout just to set up the camera, get the right angles and all that kind of stuff. So then also going over and documenting it is just another stressor for me, honestly, that I feel like doesn't actually contribute meaningfully to my results. So I just don't do it. But that isn't to say that as a beginner or even an intermediate, it isn't a good idea. I think it is, because people do forget like what it was they did the week before. Absolutely, and it might just be a fast ticket to stagnation, honestly, unless you really have a handle on it. And keep in mind, I've been training for over 11 years, so I have a pretty good idea of what my body is capable of, and I usually have a really good idea of what I did the week before, so I can get away with not doing it.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. I think as a younger trainee, it's very beneficial because a lot of people will walk into sessions with not so much of an idea as to what they're doing on that given day. Yep. I think for me, it gives real clarity as to what I want to do in that session. So again, it can be a negative because, like you said, you've got the stress of obviously, and it's worked really well because you've grown your socials incredibly. You've got the stress of filming, etc., etc., and adding the stress of thinking, oh crap, if I don't beat this on this day, like that's a bad workout. I think a lot of people can benefit, and at least this is what probably I did when I initially got into the gym, was just I'd go into sessions with an idea of what I was going to be doing, and I'd just train hard. And I know that I was taking, like you said, obviously the research suggests that taking things pretty close to failure is going to be fairly optimal when it comes to hypertrophy. And I was doing that, I was doing that on a regular basis, and I didn't have to remind myself with a logbook to be able to do that. And you don't need a logbook to be able to train hard. But nevertheless, like you said as well, and the benefits in my eyes when it comes to clarity and vision of a session, and obviously, actually that's another question that I'd like to ask. Would you bring the logbook back, and would you bring more structure back if you were going into a contest prep phase? And would that be something that you'd really want to keep an eye on when it comes down to sort of strength retention? And how would you see strength retention working without any sort of logbook approach?
I think I almost definitely would. I would probably bring it back just to keep myself extra accountable, especially in the later stages of prep when it gets really easy to play mental games with yourself and convince yourself that you're doing okay when you're not. So it just keeps you extra accountable. But I totally agree with everything that you just said. I think it definitely has merit, but it is in no way required. So I generally think that if you're the type of person who likes numbers and is motivated by seeing a progression and that kind of thing, I would really encourage you to do it. I encourage all of my clients to do it just because I want them to get the most out of their time working with me. And I think that that's a way to do it. But on the other hand, you have some people who get more out of training more so-called intuitively, like I'm doing currently. And I think that as long as there's some sort of setup in place that ensures that there's some kind of progression happening, however that may be, then you can do it whatever way you please, really.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think people will feel kind of relaxed in that environment because there's a lot of people that don't log, and they're like, oh, should I be logging? AJ should log. And I think there's a lot of pressure. And a lot of the time people can benefit from just hearing someone say, it's actually okay not to log. And
I think
a lot of people have said it recently. So I guess that's refreshing. And I think at some point in my training career, I probably will not log sessions. But as for right now, I just think I'm really in love with logging. Well, I just enjoy it. I just enjoy it. Like if I didn't enjoy training, I wouldn't train. So it's the same with the logbook. I had a question. So I've seen recently, you spending a lot of time, well, not spending a lot of time, but you've been to obviously BPAC's gym and spent time with Josh Vogel recently, and obviously they their methods to training are somewhat different to some people in the community, I guess. And what would be sort of your opinion on their side of training when it comes to sort of more time and attention work? And have you seen sort of benefits in your own training that have transferred from as a result of being there with Josh and Ben, etc.? And yeah, I guess that's what I'm really interested in, is what did you learn and what did you take home into your own training?
Yeah, well, I should say first, I haven't trained with Ben, even though Josh has, but I've trained with Josh a number of times. We just did a workout a couple days ago that I'm going to publish hopefully tomorrow the next day. Okay. So we did another leg day. Okay. And yeah, he's very focused on, intention and activating and like time under tension, it seems. And I think I've carried a lot away from it, but I still think that our go-to training styles are quite a bit different. What I've taken away from it, though, is that I really have become convinced that there is merit in slowing down the movement a little bit, even if it means dropping back the weight a bit, and really focusing on mind-muscle connection, training with intent, especially with more of the isolation movements. One area that we differ, I think, is the time under tension component. I don't think that they do a lot of again, I'm not so familiar with Ben, but just based on my experience training with Josh, they tend to not lock out movements quite as much. They tend to train more in like active range of motion. So like they'll go
even with squats, etc., leg press, and things like that.
With pretty well everything, as far as I can tell. They really try to keep that constant stimulus on the muscle. Whereas I can't say that it doesn't work. It certainly seems to, at least for them. And it's a training style that's quite enjoyable. Like the burn and the pump is really, really good. Yeah. So I could see it potentially having some merit in terms of like metabolic stress. And I think it's always a good idea to load the muscle in slightly different ways. Like this is kind of related to the old like muscle confusion thing, which has been sort of debunked, but yet it's still kind of a good idea to present a new stimulus to the body every now and then as it habituates, right? So I think like a controlled sort of muscle confusion variety, is like a little bit more, variety, exactly, or novelty, what have you. So I've taken that away from it, but I don't think that there's really any reason to always train that way. Like I think that you can train through a full range of motion, have slight pauses between your reps to catch your breath or whatever, and provided that you're taking sets within a reasonably close limit of momentary muscular failure, then you're going to be activating a full spectrum of motor units anyway. And if it's activation that drives hypertrophy, then you should see similar levels of hypertrophy between someone who does it under constant tension and someone who maybe gets a couple extra reps because they paused for that second between sets or whatever. I don't put a ton of stock in that, but yet for all that, I do find it to be a killer way to get a really good pump, and it's a really fun way to train. I love training with Josh, and I always like put quite a lot of weight in what they say because they've been very successful, and it's always, I think, smart to keep an open mind to different approaches, especially when it comes to training, because the literature is good, but there's just so many holes in it that you have to take into account the so-called anecdotal evidence as well.
I like that a lot, and I think, like I said previously, I'm moving over, I guess, to be. I like the guys that are really open-minded when it comes to the approach, and I guess I was really sort of interested when I saw your videos with Josh, because I've seen Josh, I've followed Josh as well, and I knew that you'd have pretty different training approaches, so I was really interested in it, and I agree with you. I totally agree when it comes to just being open-minded to accepting a variety of approaches, and you can quite easily get lost in one train of thought, and I think more people can benefit from just, I guess, opening their eyes to a variety of approaches and just being chilled about that.
I think it was Albert Einstein, but I'm not sure who said keep an open mind but not so open that your brain falls out. That's kind of what I try to do. It's like I don't just keep my mind open to everything, because then there'll just be so much bullshit coming in. But if something makes sense, at least theoretically, it's like I can think of a reason why constant tension might be good, and it seems to have worked for this person. I'm going to be open to it with a critical eye. I kind of like always keep a critical eye on everything, regardless of whether it's coming from peer-reviewed literature or from some gym bro with a great physique. I always am skeptical. And so as long as you have that general overarching mental framework, then I think that keeping an open mind is the best way to keep yourself moving forward.
Absolutely. Agreed. And so you've balanced both bodybuilding and powerlifting in the past. Now, I know that a lot of people will put weight in having a squat and a deadlift and a bench and an OHP in a program. Now, I'm specifically interested, and I think a lot of my listeners are as well, as to how you would, or how you've seen best fitting a squat and a deadlift variation into a training protocol. Mm-hmm. And what have you seen in terms of, I guess, the benefits of potentially focusing on one for a period of time rather than having both in the same training week? I'm just interested to see as to how you've done it in the past and whether there's any approaches that you've taken that you think, wow, like that worked really well. Like I've been able to progress both at the same time. It's something anecdotally I've struggled with as well, trying to do both at the same time.
Right. So I think that within the context of a bodybuilding like hybrid routine, say you were running a push-pull legs, we can just run with that. One way to do it would be to do your heavy squat earlier in the week. So say you do your leg day, put legs first, do your heavy squat, and then do like a speed or like a technique deadlift, so like a pause deadlift or a speed deadlift, something like that. And then on the other day, so on the other leg day, 4 days later or whatever it is, you do your heavy deadlift, and then you do speed squats or pause squats or something like that in that order. So you'd have like a heavy and then a light, and you put them both on the leg day. I found that to be better than, say, putting the deadlifts on the back day, even though I have set it up that way before, but I find it just tends to interfere with the squat performance more than if you cluster them together. And you definitely want to stagger the heavy light. So you're not just, you wouldn't want to go heavy squat, heavy deadlift. You want to, that would be brutal, right? If you're putting them on the same day. But I find that you just run into recovery issues if you set it up the other way, unless they're running more of a powerlifting style program, in which case you can stagger them a little bit more because they don't have all that assistant work. They don't need to do all the back volume and so on. So it's a little bit easier.
No, that makes sense. Yeah.
In terms of leaving one, I've done that. I've run a phase where I squat 5 days a week, or actually I think it was 6 days a week. Yeah, it was 6 days a week. Okay. It was like this like DUP mesocycle, and I increased my squat like crazy, but I also increased my deadlift like crazy, even though I wasn't deadlifting the whole 4 or 6 weeks, whatever it was. So I think that you can do it that way, but I wouldn't only deadlift and not squat. I think that it goes better the other way. So you can squat a whole lot and you'll recover from it really well, but you won't recover from deadlifting a whole lot. I wouldn't recommend doing that more than twice a week. Even for advanced people, I rarely will program it 3 times a week.
Yeah, no, I've had phases where I deadlift twice a week, and I find the general fatigue just horrific. I feel just generally like I deadlifted yesterday, and I just like pretty much the whole of today I felt generally just fatigued and run down. And I think that's something that people overlook, is that adverse effect on your CNS and that recovery side of things. And people maybe just don't have a gauge on that. I guess when they get into the gym, they're just like, oh, I'm tired. I don't like, but my back's not sore, my hamstring's not sore, and they get a squat and they wonder why they can't.
Exactly.
So yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense when it comes to squatting more frequently than you would deadlift, but still deadlifting. I think anecdotally as well, I've seen that work pretty well in programs. Like I can quite easily squat 2 times a week, but I wouldn't be able to deadlift any more than once, I don't think.
Oh, really? Interesting.
No, I've had phases of deadlifting twice a week, and they've taken so much away from my squats and, like I said, my other work that I haven't been able to progress. But when I've just focused on bringing one up and potentially deadlifting in another day during the week, either after a squat session, directly after a squat, or sometimes the day after, because I've found that sometimes I'm more fatigued the second day. My back's more fatigued the second day after a lower body workout as opposed to the first. And I'm not sure if there's anything to sort of rationalize that. But But in terms of recovery, I found that, yeah, I think the first day is sometimes better just to get it in.
In that case, I would probably at least do like a Romanian deadlift or something like that after the squat session, just to
Yes,
have a
absolutely.
little bit more specificity set towards the power lifts. But you can absolutely get away with deadlifting once a week.
Yeah,
I would keep it a heavy session though.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So one of my questions for sort of long-term progression, and I think you've touched on this kind of in other questions, but in terms of days when you feel like on top of the world and everything's moving really, really well, if you have days like that, how beneficial do you see it as just taking that day as a day where you just go hard and you really take advantage of that day? Or I guess again it really requires context. So it requires, what sort of split are you heading for? Are you having like a more powerlifting focus, etc. But as a bodybuilder, what do you think is the benefit of grasping those days with both hands and really doing potentially more than you would normally do on a normal day, and progressing more fast than you would normally on a normal day? What do you think the benefits are of that?
Speaking from me personally, I would just go hard. Like
Yeah.
I love to train hard, and I like to have fun when I train too. Like I legitimately like look forward to training every day. It's like something that I love to do. I love to go to the gym, and I want to keep it that way. And if I feel like I'm always holding myself back, or like, even if it gets too regimented for me, I'll find my training less enjoyable, at least at the moment.
You got
There's a time
through phases like that when it's been too
yeah,
structured, yeah.
yeah, especially at the moment where like I said, I am focusing a lot more on business things, and I have to keep training sessions within a certain time frame, that kind of thing. But if I have my coach hat on, I would say, listen to your coach on this one. Like if you have a little bit more juice in the tank, then it should just mean that you're able to handle more weight, but still hit the RPE as given in the program, kind of thing, and save it for your last set. Like if you have this extra energy and you just want to go ham on your last set, then go for it, right? I don't want to hold you back. But if it's just me in the gym and I'm running my own training, yeah, absolutely. Like I'm not gonna hold back.
No, I do agree with that. I think, again, like I said, it requires some element of context. So if you're, I don't know, sometimes you have days, I know that, and I don't know whether you can relate, post-contest, I've had days where I feel like $1 million because I've suddenly got more calories inside of me, but the weights that I think that I can potentially move when I feel like that will not move. And
Right.
you get under the idea that, suddenly you're going to gain all your strength back, and that's
Right,
not
right.
the case. So I
Yep.
think obviously it requires context as to the situation and
Yep.
what that individual is going through. So, but yeah, I think I've taken advantage of the days where I feel like that, and I've employed like AMRAP sets or slightly increasing the load more than I would do. But I have potentially found some sort of adverse effects later on as to whether that would maybe lead me to accumulating more fatigue than you're normally used to. So potentially take away from another session. But yeah, I guess that's probably a thing that I would ask in terms of structure. My final question, Jeff, not to hold you for too long, is really what have you seen when, because obviously you've worked with a lot of people online, and coaching. What have you seen in terms of linear progression with certain individuals, as in terms of constantly progressing lifts and really packing on a lot of tissue? Have you seen sort of any characteristic traits that these individuals have potentially? I know that you'll obviously try to develop somewhat of a personal feel with individuals, so you might get to know sort of what they're like, potentially what jobs they do, etc. And have you just seen any characteristics where people just build a lot of muscle and seem to progress their lifts really well? Is there anything that you've seen? Any trends?
Yeah,
Any examples as well?
there's definitely different. I would have to think about correlations between individuals, but
Sure.
there's no doubt massive differences in terms of response to a given program.
Okay.
And this has been substantiated in the literature where there have been like a ton of different studies where they'll put two groups on the exact same training program, and you'll see that they're sorted by like responder and non-responder groups. Okay. You'll see massive differences in how much muscle they gain in the same amount of time on the same program, presumably similar diets. And so there's a huge genetic component to all of this. And one paper said that genetic differences account for 50 to 80% of differences in muscularity from twin studies. So the differences in muscularity can be like, you see some guys, they haven't lifted at all, and they just look like a jacked guy, right? Yeah. Might not be athletic, but they're just jacked. And so genetics can, like I said, can account for 50 to 80% of those differences. And then further, you also see differences in satellite cell activation. So satellite cells are kind of like the cells that form new muscle cells, or they repair the old muscle cells. Those are activated to a very high degree in a small subset of the population. So you have people categorized in these studies as being non-responders, so they just basically don't hypertrophy, mild responders, and then extreme responders. And you only see satellite cell activation to an appreciable degree in the extreme responder group. And I've just noticed that with my clients. It's like some people can do all the right things with their training and diet. They just won't get the results that some guys will, regardless of time or, all the other variables. So there is a huge genetic component. And whenever I say that, it almost sounds discouraging, especially if you're the type of person who isn't genetically endowed with, muscle building abilities. But I think it's more realistic, and it allows people to set goals that are based on their current starting place, not where they want to be or where someone else is. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important to only, compare your progress to your own starting place, not someone else's current place or what have you. So yeah, that's something that I've noticed. But in terms of trends, I guess the only one that I can really think of would be generally people who were athletes tend to respond really well to training. Other than that, I don't notice any like racial differences really. Black guys are generally more muscular in my experience, but it's kind of tough to say because I've worked with there's some white guys who are just like absolute mass monsters too. And it goes the other way too. It goes with genetics with body fat and body fat distribution. Uh-huh. It's so genetically regulated. Like I'll have some people diet so hard to get lean while others just maintain it in their off season without tracking quite easily. So a lot of it is really, really predetermined at birth, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it, but you can always optimize what hand it is that you were given, right? But you just need to be realistic about what you can expect, I guess.
Yeah, I can totally agree with you on the sort of the body fat and the contest prep side of things. I've seen people. Yeah, I've seen people like they'll be absolutely fine, no issues, and they'll be extremely lean, whereas I'd get to that point, that level of conditioning, and would be feeling like complete shit. Mm-hmm. It's just, I guess, a lot of people. Yeah, I think I'd agree with you as well when it comes to like setting that barrier, not setting the barrier, but setting the bar when it comes to your own goals and what you can achieve. I think again, like potentially people then almost take that too literally and then start setting really low ceilings for themselves, which is really unfortunate. And they'll look at potentially physiques like yours and other pro natural bodybuilders and be like, I'm never going to be part of the genetic elites. But there's plenty of pro bodybuilders that haven't been dealt a brilliant card, correct?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's definitely the case, and there's some literature on this, and off the top of my head I won't remember, but it has something to do with the fact that there are two different alleles, and one or both can be inherited. And when you look at elite level sprinters, so many of them have both alleles. But a lot of the ones who are at the very top only have one allele, right? Like they only have one copy of that sprinter chromosome or what have you. Uh-huh. I'm sure I got the details wrong here, but the idea is that you can outwork your genetic limitation or outsmart it or whatever. So you can become the absolute best version of yourself, but you're never going to look exactly like me unless you have my height and bone structure and muscle insertions and all of these things. So you have to look at your goals within the context of your starting place, right? That's mostly why I harp on the genetic thing, and especially lately. And then also I think that in light of the massive contribution of genetics and just, training consistently and with enough effort, a lot of those finer details that get a lot of attention, especially in the science community and science fitness community, really just comparatively just matter so much less, right? So I think that I think it needs a little bit more attention, maybe for people to realize this will work, but it's going to work within the confines of your genetic potential.
Yeah, no,
right?
Totally agreed. And
yeah,
I think those are some really good points that I've never heard before when it comes to, seeing traits in between people. And it's almost nice that sorry, go ahead, Jeff, you were going to say something.
I was going to say, when you mentioned traits, I just thought there's I feel like a lot of research is starting to focus more so on genetics now, and it's starting to inform us more. There's a study published late last year where they looked at different genotypes. So basically what your DNA has written in it.
Yeah.
And I don't know the details because I haven't read the whole study, but the basic idea was that based on a given genotype, so what genes you have and what genes are being expressed, you can structure your training to match that. Wow. And so you know how some people will be I just really respond well to high reps, right?
Yeah.
And then you'll have the pushback from others being oh, but we know that, tension is optimized in this rep range, so you're probably not best to train only in higher reps. But based on what we are learning about genetics, it could very well be the case that some people just might respond better to certain rep ranges or lower rep ranges or whatever. So until that data becomes available and we can actually, test our own genomes to see what would be most optimal for us, I think it's smart to just pay attention to what is working for you and actually put some stock in it. Don't just think this study, which was conducted on, 30 people and then averages were taken from that. Really think of yourself as an individual data point and figure out what it is that works for you in an unbiased way. And you look at it with a critical eye and consider all the other factors that are going into it. It's probably a better way to figure out, what is your best approach.
That's really interesting because that almost seems to me as taking science with an anecdotal approach. If we were able to have that gene type thing, that would be taking science, but with an anecdotal approach to it. It's both. And that's going to really create the most power, I guess, when it comes to developing a physique or losing fat, etc. So I think that's really awesome. I think people will take home a lot from that, and again, have more clarity and have more comfort in just doing a lot that feels right for them. And again, that comes back to the bare basics of building a training program. It's if adherence is there and they're enjoying it and they're doing stuff they like, then they're going to make decent progress anyway. And I guess that comes back to the start of things. But yeah, awesome, Jeff. I would like to really, really thank you for your time and coming on the podcast. I'm sure a lot of people will love this. And a lot of people follow you and really, really like your stuff, so please keep it up. I had one more question. This is kind of personal in terms of I'm intrigued to follow you and follow your progress. So when can we expect to sort of see you back on stage as a bodybuilder? Have you got any plans to step on stage? And potentially, why not, etc.
I'm definitely taking a hiatus for this year. I found, actually, when you asked me earlier when my best times of progress were, I feel like I'm almost in one now. I feel like my physique is really taking on a look that it didn't have before. It's hardening, muscle maturity is starting to kick in, whatever that means. But I'm liking what I'm seeing in terms of my own physique development, and probably not coincidentally, it's also one of the longest times I've taken off from the stage. I took all of 2016 off, and I'm also planning to take all of 2017 off as of right now. So I'm really going to focus on growing, focus on some business related stuff. And then the tentative plan is to come back in 2018 and compete. So we'll see. But as a natural, you've got to give the muscles time to cook. So that's what I'm doing.
Absolutely. And one more question, is your goal to, compete on, I guess, the WNBF world stage and compete against the best of the best? Has that always been your goal as a competitive bodybuilder?
Yeah, I would say so. I've taken some interest in the classic physique division, so I'm curious to see how that will develop over the next year. For my height, especially with the new muscle that I have on, I'd say I'm pretty close to the top end of the weight cap or whatever they have there.
Okay.
And I think that my physique would probably do well, especially I've made some arm gains over the last couple of years. So I feel like I could do that. So we'll see. I probably won't jump ship with the WNBF. I still have my ties there. They're a great organization, and I'd love to compete on the world stage, and I have no doubt that I will. But whether or not I'll try out the classic physique thing will remain to be seen. We'll see.
Awesome news. Lots of stuff to, I guess, look forward to, and plenty more content coming from you, I'm sure.
Yeah, man.
But yeah, thanks again very much, Jeff. And I'm sure again, like I said, listeners will love this. But if you have watched this and you do enjoy it, please give us a like on YouTube. Comment below with any sort of questions that you perhaps have on any of the topics that have been raised, and share it around if you feel like someone else can benefit from this. And again, I'd like to thank people that did, as a result of me asking for it last time, review the podcast. I really appreciate it, and it always helps the growth, and obviously helps me get more awesome people very much like Jeff on the podcast for future episodes. But thanks again, Jeff, and yeah, I wish you all the best for the future, mate.
Thank you, man. It was a real pleasure to be here. Great questions. I enjoyed the discussion a lot.